Good afternoon. My name is Sanjeev Verma. I'm a co-founder of PreVeil, an end-to-end encrypted email and file collaboration platform for information security and compliance. We are honored to partner with the NIST MEPs from Alabama, Texas, Virginia, Massachusetts, and Connecticut to hold this third annual public-private CMMC Day. Our objective is to provide the DIB with information and guidance from the very top experts on not only the CMMC program, but perhaps more importantly, its relationship to existing DFARS and NIST 800-171 regulations in place. A warm welcome to the almost 2,000 participants registered for today's webinar, representing small to medium defense contractors, primes, higher education institutions, CMMC registered practitioners, C3PAOs, as well as international defense contractors. There are several reasons for the strong interest in today's webinar. The first is that adoption of CMMC is now just about 6 months away and will have wide-ranging impact on the entire defense industrial base. Many in the DIB are looking at the CMMC timeline to evaluate when to commence preparation and are weighing the risks of acting now or perhaps delaying. They're trying to understand what are their responsibilities to meet existing DFARS while CMMC is enforced. The second important aspect that's drawing people is that a significant number of contractors are now moving ahead and are looking for guidance on how to implement the program and prepare for assessments. What do these assessments look like, etc. Our keynote speakers are, bar none, the very best authorities to provide you guidance to answer these key questions because they come from the US Department of Defense. Ms. Stacy Bostjanick is the director of the CMMC program in the US Department of Defense. She's a member of the Senior Executive Service and serves as the Chief of Implementation and Policy and Deputy CIO for Cybersecurity in the Office of the CIO. Stacy is responsible for shepherding CMMC through the federal rulemaking process and ultimately implementing it across more than 220,000 DIB organizations. Her role includes collaboration across the federal government with partners such as Homeland Security, to standardize this process and truly federalize it. Stacy, thank you so much for shouldering this enormous responsibility for national security. It is my distinct privilege to welcome you to today's webinar. We understand that you are at the Pentagon today and therefore unable to join by video, but we very much nonetheless appreciate you taking the time to join by phone and answer key questions on folks' mind. We know that CMMC is in a quiet period as you approach the March 2023 deadline, but we would still like to ask you the most important questions that are on the minds of the DIB, not only on CMMC, but also on DFARS. So with that, let's kick off this CMMC session with our very first question. So Stacy, as we wait for CMMC to come into effect, can you clarify what are contractors' existing DFARS obligations to protect CUI using the same NIST 800-171 controls that apply in CMMC?
Okay, well, good afternoon, everybody. And first of all, I have a new title now. I am now the Chief of DIB Cybersecurity. So they've moved all of the cybersecurity responsibilities for the DIB under my portfolio. So I've got an expanded responsibility here. So I'll bring some of that into at the end of our conversation. But today, contractors have already signed up to comply with the NIST 800-171 when they accepted the 252-204-7012 clause in their contracts. And then resultant of that, we've also put in place the 252-204-7019 and 7020 clauses. 7019 requires contractors to go into the Supplier Performance Risk System, the SPRS database, and establish a self-assessment against the NIST 800-171, rating yourself as to where you feel you are in your compliance with the requirements. And then the 70-20 clause, as I'm sure you'll hear later from Will and Jen, the DIBCAC has the authority per that clause, if it's in your contract, if they need to come in and view your systems and your networks to see where you are in compliance, they have that right, and you need to allow them into your systems. So CMMC is just the validation program that people have done what they've already agreed to do in complying and establishing the requirements of the NIST 800-171 in their current networks. So there's been a lot of confusion and conflation about the cost of CMMC. It's way too expensive. We can't afford it. But what really companies are complaining about is the cost of the implementation of those requirements in the NIST 800-171 that have been in place since about 2013, mandatory since 2017. So companies have had about a 7-year span to be able to get right with this. And now they're coming up and admitting that it's too expensive, that they can't afford it. And that's something that should have happened back in 2015, 2013 when that rule came out. So the department as a whole is looking at different things to assist small and medium companies and large companies in getting right with cyber, because it is a wildly important aspect of our national security to ensure that our companies are cyber secure, not for just DoD data, but your own intellectual property and protection of your accounting information. We've had companies who've had their bank account information stolen and the payments for their government contracts redirected to other people's bank accounts. And unfortunately, DoD doesn't have another chunk of money to make you whole when somebody steals your account information.
Well, thank you very much for those pretty clear remarks. Let's delve in a little bit deeper. So certainly NIST 800-171 has been in effect since 2017. Can you comment on recently announced DoD and DOJ initiatives to step up enforcement to ensure organizations meet their DFARS 7012 requirements? And examples of those, I think you've been mentioning already in your early comments, are 7019 and 7020 clauses. But this is an alphabet soup, so repetition never hurts the prayer. Could you kindly expand on just those initiatives are to step up enforcement to ensure protection of CUI?
Sure. So when companies agreed to accept the 7012 clause in their contracts, they agreed to meet a compliance standard of the NIST 800-171. Undoubtedly, the 7019 and 7020 clauses coming into effect after that is a way for us to get a handle on where companies are in their compliance status. DOJ has said, when you sign up and accept that, you are saying you're going to be compliant. And so if a company has misrepresented where they are in their compliance status, then DOJ will have the ability to go after them under the False Claims Act. And they have come out publicly and said that they're going to ramp up their review of that, and they're going to begin to hold companies accountable under that guideline. The other thing that DOD and Mr. Tenaglia's group has put out guidance to contracting officers to start paying more attention to where companies are in their compliance. And if a company is lagging and not performing in the way that they're expected to, then they will be allowed, the contracting officers will be allowed to use the tools that they have in their toolkit, such as withholding of payment, cure notices, show cause letters, and even as far as going to terminate the contract.
Super helpful, Stacy. There's a perception, and I think you did address it, but I want to get into it a little bit deeper. There's a perception among some conflating the CMMC with existing DFARS and basically saying that, look, CMMC program details are being finalized, so perhaps it's prudent for me to wait till all the program details are finalized before commencing implementation of NIST 800-171 program. Would you agree with that assessment if a company comes to that conclusion?
Absolutely freaking not. I would say that you have agreed in your contracts to comply with the NIST 800-171, and that is separate and apart from the CMMC program, right? And so you already have by law a requirement, well, by regulation, a requirement to comply with the NIST 800-171. And putting that off is not going to do you any good. CMMC is only the verification that you have implemented those requirements and you are in compliance. It is not going to change how you put that in place. It's not going to change what requirements are there. We've standardized on the NIST 800-171. If you use that as part of your guidelines for what you implement to become compliant, you'll be good to go. So this doesn't get easier over time. You might as well dig in and get it started and protect your own intellectual property and accounts as well as our data, because this is what is pertinent to the security of this nation. And we all have a responsibility as citizens of this country to protect it and to make sure that we provide for the best military superiority for the men and women who put their lives on the line for us to secure our freedoms.
Thank you, Stacy. I'm going to ask yet another question from the perspective of those mulling, when to act on it. So in CMMC 2.0, your department introduced the notion of limited waivers. In other words, you could be waived from responsibility for CMMC 2.0. So some interpret this mechanism as offering flexibility to embark on CMMC 2.0 only after they've been awarded a contract, perhaps assuming that, look, I'll get the contract, for seek a waiver, and then later embark on obtaining certification. Could you offer color and clarification on that?
Yes. So the waiver process that was put in place with CMMC 2.0 is only expected to be ever used in very rare circumstances. It's going to take a program manager doing a market survey, understanding the landscape, and it will be in cases where we are going into such new and innovative areas that companies would never have possibly heard of CMMC before. And so therefore, based on that determination that the companies that would participate on this particular capability have never been involved in federal government contracting before or DoD contracting, and he's going to have to put forth a waiver package that will go all the way up to the senior acquisition executive of that service to get approval. So it's going to require approval at the highest levels, and it's going to be expected to be in very rare cases. So if you do business with the DoD or the federal government now, and you are aware of CMMC and you are aware of the NIST 800-171s and the things you have to do to be compliant, then I suggest you don't wait.
Well, thank you again. Now let's move on to some of the nitty-gritty. I think you've been very, very clear in what the DoD's expectations are for complying with DFARS and its relationship with CMMC, very specifically that DFARS is asking you to implement NIST 800-171, the 110 clauses, and in CMMC, the verification is going to be essentially verified through third-party assessments through C3POs. So now let's look at some of the areas that are on the minds of folks, which is that will CUI be marked better for DIB contractors going forward? Admittedly, it's not been clear what's CUI or not. Today, only some of what we consider CUI is marked as such. Could you add some color on, how you view CUI markings from the DoD going forward?
So my view is it's a work in progress. We do recognize that program managers and have been lax in their marking of CUI. We're preparing training programs. We've got a guide that's going to come out that is going to help assist with that. So our anticipation is it's going to get better. And I know that that is one of the biggest concerns and questions that I've heard is are we going to see better marking of CUI? And so I'm keeping my fingers crossed it's coming, because we're working really hard to make sure we have that training and guide in place to assist and make it easier.
Stacy, moving on to, incentives. Can you offer some color on incentives to getting assessed in 2022 before the final rulemaking for CMMC is in process, including, learnings from the recent voluntary assessments that you did, put in place?
Okay, so what we've done as far as a means of incentive is the DCMA DIBCAC, and Jen and Will are on the phone. They can talk to this as well. We set up a joint surveillance program. So the way it works is if a company feels that they are ready for their CMMC, for their NIST 800-171 assessment, they reach out to a C3 PAO. They negotiate their deal with the C3 PAO, what the boundaries are and the scope of the assessment. Once they have that solidified, the C3 PAO will contact the DCMA DIBCAC to get scheduled to do a joint assessment. What this means is that your C3 PAO will come out and actually do the hands-on work for the assessment, and a DIBCAC member will be there for observatory capabilities to ensure that that assessment's gone on in a proper manner. Once that assessment is completed, then they will take the assessment report from the C3 PAO, ingest it into the system, and in SPURS, that company will have a score listed under a DIBCAC high assessment. Now, here's where the incentive part comes. As long our intent, right, because we are going into the rulemaking process, and if somebody raises an issue with this during rulemaking, we may be precluded from allowing it. But our intent is that once we have CMMC goes live and it becomes a thing, any company that had that third-party joint surveillance done and has reached the score or the CMMC level 2 certification, that score will convert to a CMMC level 2 certification. It'll be in good force and stead for the next 3 years after that, provided that that company does their annual affirmation to make sure that they are still compliant with those requirements and their network hasn't changed. So that would be the incentives. We have begun the program. Last I heard, we had done 3. I think there might be more. I'll let Jen and Will talk to that when it's their turn. And the first 3 went very well. With every new process, we had some things that we had to work out, and I think we've got all of the lanes in the road defined well, and we've become a well-oiled machine, and we're working very closely with the C3 PAOs, and it's going well. So I'm gonna be very optimistic and say it's really working out well for us.
So just to add some color, indeed, the C3 PAOs that conducted those assessments are speaking in later sessions, and following right after your comments are their partners, DIBCAC. So, William and Jennifer are going to speak to that as well. And I do feel that this is an interesting, incentive, because, going through this assessment with a C3 PAO puts an organization in great stead for being, showing that they're compliant with their DFARS, requirements, and with the right scores as CMMC is implemented, converting that into an actual external certification. So thank you for putting that together. Stacy, when CMMC 2.0 assessments begin at scale, which again, according to your timeline schedule, is contracts, we'll start seeing them in, May of next year, rulemaking in March. How do you see this thing scale? And again, I speak from the perspective of a skeptic. oftentimes an organization will say, well, DoD said that CMMC will be put into contracts over a period of a few years. And so they then interpret that as saying, okay, if it's over 4 years, then I have 4 more years to prepare. Could you offer color on that, again, in light of their current DFARS requirements and the rollout of the program?
Yes.
So we want to hear directly from you on that.
Okay. Well, and so I think I can't hammer this home enough, right? You're already required to do the 7012 and be implementing your CMMC, and there are other mechanisms for verification that you're doing that in place, right? So resting on your laurels because you know that CMMC is going to have, and I think right now, if we get an interim rule, it'll be a 3-year rollout, right? We expect to have full implementation of CMMC by 2026. We have begun the training and testing of the assessors. We're working hard to expedite the suitability determination efforts for the assessors to ensure that we meet our need of about 4,000 to 5,000 assessors by 2026. So to that end, yes, we're going to have a 2 to 3 year rollout depending on whether we get a proposed or an interim rule, but companies are expected to already be complying today. CMMC is just the fact that somebody from a third party is going to come in and validate that you've done what you've said you're doing and that you do comply and you're ready to handle CUI. So, thinking that, oh, it's going to be a 3-year rollout and I'm not going to have to worry about it. Well, except for during that entire rollout period, the 7020 and 7019 clauses aren't going away. So if DIBCAC deems the need to come in and do an assessment on you, you're going to have to open your doors and you're going to have to let them come in. I think when you look at the acquisition cycles, our intent is to apply CMMC to new acquisitions. So if you're in your first year of your acquisition and you got 3 more years or 4 more years left on the contract, then you probably won't have to suffer a C3 PAO assessment until that new contract comes in. But that doesn't mean that the DIBCAC can't come in and look at you in the interim.
You've been super, super clear on this. So let's now move on. I think you've basically clarified this thing that has been in the minds that, well, it could roll out over periods, so I can wait. And your guidance, I think, couldn't be clearer on the responsibilities that exist right now. And we often, basically say, look, CMMC is just when the C3 PAO is going to come and validate it, but the programs from a compliance perspective need to be in place for the organization right now. So it's great for the DIB to hear that directly from you. So now let's move on to my final 2 questions for you, Stacy, which is several registrants for this session are from outside the United States. You've got a big partner base of DIB suppliers outside. What's the DoD plan for applying CMMC to non-US entities that are in partner countries?
So as we've said ad nauseum on this call today, the NIST 800-171 requirements already apply to even our foreign partners as well. But for the implementation of CMMC, we have to work to establish agreements between our partners and the U.S. as to how we're going to implement that in their spaces. We've had a couple of countries to date that have balked at the prospect of a U.S. person coming and doing an assessment on their soil. And so we're working closely with the different partners to come up with a paradigm where either they have assessors and are putting assessors in place. Some countries are interested in sending their assessors to the U.S. to be trained or adopting the training in their country to be able to train assessors. We've had some countries that have wanted to have their government officials be the assessors and want to have them come get trained to do it. So each country is taking a little bit different tact in approaching this. And so we're working very closely with each and every one of them to be able to put together an agreement or an MOU as to how this will go forward in the future. This international side, we'll probably have to have an additional rulemaking capability. We did not include the international part in the initial rule because we needed to expedite it and get it through and have it established first. And so that will be our next hurdle after we get this rule rolling, is to pivot towards the international side.
And my very last question, Stacy, for you is, again, pardon my questions coming as if from a skeptic, but there is also perception that, look, these compliance programs like CMMC 2.0 is kind of some check the box compliance, somehow try to fit yourself into what it's asking for. But as we understand it, the primary goal of the program is to strengthen the fundamental security of CUI. Now, given your enhanced role, being responsible for cybersecurity, congratulations on that. How does the DoD plan to encourage the adoption of better cybersecurity, for example, one that is rooted in zero trust, into the program?
So I'm not quite so sure I should be congratulated or give me your condolences, right? Because it's a big job, and I do know Mr. McEwen's like, we got a lot of work to do. But one of the things that we're looking at, and there are a lot of opportunities across the department today to assist companies in becoming cyber secure. Right? You have DC3 that has capabilities to assist companies to walk through the NIST 800-171 to understand what they need to do and to be able to, hang on just a second. Okay, to be able to understand what they need to do and where their gaps are. NSA has a secure domain name service that they're working in at the NSA Collaboration Center to help the companies, and they can reach out and do that. The Air Force has Blue Cyber. ANS has Project Spectrum. Project Spectrum has an online tool. They also have counselors that you can talk to, and they also will send counselors out to your spaces to work with you. And it's all free to the DIB partners. You just have to avail yourself of that. And with moving forward with zero trust and things of that nature, we're also working with different cloud service providers and tool providers with the vision that there could be potentially a cloud service with a tool set on top of it, and that would meet maybe 85% of the requirements of the NIST 800-171. There will always be a handful of requirements that a company's going to have to do, right? Your insider threat, the log that you have at the front door, those kinds of things are things that you can't outsource, that you would have to be in charge of and ensure that you've got your policies and procedures in line, written down to make sure that you can pass that. But we are looking at different environments and capabilities to make it easier and less onerous on the small and medium companies to be able to be compliant. So all things that we're researching and piloting, and more to come in the future. But we definitely have heard the outcry from small and medium companies that this is too expensive and too hard for them. So we're rapidly working to make sure that we can find avenues to help them, because this is a national security imperative. I cannot say that enough, that this is something we have to do for this nation to protect ourselves, to ensure our position in the world.
Well, thank you so very much, Stacy. We appreciate your presence here. We look forward to working together collaboratively to improve security for CMMC and NIST 800-171. And both my condolences and congratulations on your new and expanded role. So thank you so very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And it was a pleasure to be here. And anytime, if you have any questions or concerns, please reach out to me, because that's what we're here for. So thank you so much for the opportunity.
You're very welcome. Thank you. So now let's move on to, the rules are clear. Now we want to get ourselves ready for assessments. You heard the word DIBCAC mentioned. Our second keynote features top assessors from DIBCAC. DIBCAC stands for the Defense Industrial Base Cybersecurity Assessment Center. It is the United States Department of Defense's highest ranking assessment organization. DIBCAC audits and certifies organizations that eventually become C3PAO. So any certified C3PAO had to get itself audited by DIBCAC. DIBCAC will also audit organizations for compliance with current DFARS requirements. As Stacy had mentioned, you could be tapped to be assessed. And DIBCAC will also be the sole auditor for defense organizations at the very top that require level 3 CMMC certification. We are fortunate to have with us today Ms. Jennifer Henderson and Mr. William Spence. William is a group chief and he leads assessment teams for NIST 800 CMMC audits. Ms. Henderson focuses on strategic planning and prioritization of DIB companies that need to get assessed and is herself a CMMC certified professional assessor. So in our next keynote, the DIBCAC will share with you, their learnings, what are the important topics you need to bear in mind while preparing for assessments. And after their presentation, we'll follow up with a few questions that we often hear are on the minds of the DIB. So please welcome Jennifer and William, and over to you for your presentation.
Good afternoon. Are you guys pushing the slides?
We'd be happy to.
Please.
I do not have a copy of the slides right now. William, why don't you take it from there?
Just let me do this thing. Okay. All right, I am going to put the slides out. Just give me 1 second and I will share my screen. Can you see my screen?
Yes, thank you.
Great.
All right. Good afternoon. Today, Jennifer Henderson and myself will be presenting some of the information we've gathered recently from our DIBCAC assessments. Next slide, please. Some of the quick topics we're going to cover today before we get to the questions are the type of assessments DIBCAC are currently performing. The big one for us to push out to the industry is, of course, our top 10 other than satisfied requirements. A little information on some updated scores that we've been seeing. We'll just throw out the links for references and, of course, some publicity for our website. Next slide, please.
The types of assessments that DIBCAC are currently performing, this should not be new to anyone. It's the NIST SP 800-171 DoD high and medium assessments. Of course, the basic assessments are self-assessments done and performed by the DIB contractor, right? So the DIBCAC actually is only involved with the medium and high DoD assessments, according to the DFARS 252.204 7020 clause. And it checks for compliance to the NIST SP 800-171 in accordance with the 7012 clause. So also we are performing the C3PO assessments and ensuring that the C3POs or the candidate C3POs are compliant. Also to the NIST SP 800-171 or CMMC level 2. In addition, DIBCAC also performs joint surveillance assessments as well within our DCMA Joint Surveillance Authority. And that has been in existence for a while, but it's under DCMA Manual 2303-1, our surveillance policies. Anything else to add about that?
Nothing else. Next slide, please. All right, and everybody likes a good pie chart. So here we have what the other than satisfied requirements look like. And as you can see, the lowest of our top 10 is 2%. So everything else is probably about 1%. And what you don't see here is, the 1% does cover pretty much all of the requirements. So what you'll see in different environments is different things not being implemented. But the big ones are going to be 3.13.11 and, of course, 3.5.3. If you want to go to the next slide. 31311 being, FIPS validation. That's always been a hard one for a lot of companies. And the important thing to remember here is to understand the control and flow of your CUI. You don't want to just apply FIPS everywhere. If you don't need to be using FIPS in that part of your environment, don't apply the FIPS validation to that equipment or the associated software, but focus on where the CUI is processed, stored, or transmitted. That'll reduce the footprint of where you have to implement the FIPS validation. And when we come to assess, of course, if you know where your CUI is and what the flow of that CUI is, we're going to be focused on FIPS associated with that flow of CUI. The next big one, of course, is multi-factor. And years ago, this was a lot harder to implement. Today, it's a lot easier to implement, but it still takes some time and you have to understand your environment. So you want to focus on knowing what your environment looks like, what's in your environment, and how you can enable it with MFA. This is just a safe practice for anything these days, and I personally use it for all of my banking web transactions, and anything where I can enable MFA, I have it enabled. So as a company, you should definitely focus on how you can get there. The rest of them all are a less percentage that we've seen across the board, but they are important. Specifically, you start looking at 314.1, identify, reporting, and correcting system flaws. It also ties into another one that we've seen, which is scan for vulnerabilities. The big thing we've seen with scanning for vulnerabilities is a lot of people aren't doing authenticated scans if it's not an endpoint application that are scanning the local endpoints. But if you're doing unauthenticated scans, you really don't know what's going on in your network past the surface. And you really want to understand everything that's going on in your network. And then, of course, as part of 314.1, patching and correcting those flaws quickly. A lot of these big news breaches aren't because of a 0-day. It's because somebody didn't patch anything. Or something from a few months ago to a few years ago. So you really want to stay on top of your patch management and ensure everything is up to date. Some of the other things we've seen is the periodic risk assessments not being accomplished, or people are just doing scans. The risk assessments really are an overall risk assessment of your entire organization to understand the impact of various things, cyber being one of them. And then, of course, how does cyber impact those other areas? And then the other one that you don't want to test when it happens is the incident response capability. You really want to know how that's working, who you have to report things to, what you're looking for. You don't want to have to be figuring it out during your first incident. If you are testing it regularly, you'll see that there might be flaws here, or this isn't working right. So define how often you're going to test, and then stick to that definition of timeline, so it's been tested, and when it happens, people are more likely to respond accordingly. And then, of course, looking at 341, establishing and maintaining baseline configurations. If you don't know what's right, you don't know what to look for, what's wrong. So you really want to understand what your baseline is, and then when there's changes to it, why are there changes? Otherwise, again, you'll never detect something. And then looking at 333, 334, and 335, there's a lot about logs. With 333, threats change over time and pretty quickly within the cyber world. So you want to make sure you are reviewing and updating what you're logging at some periodicity. And with the changes happening as frequently as they are, it should be not something that only occurs annually. But that is something you should define and stick to. As you start looking at your audit logs, if there's an audit logging process failure, something stops logging, it needs to be alerted to. If you're not alerting to it, that could be a way that something is occurring. It's actually a good indicator of something, an incident has started, if something stops logging. So you definitely want to pay attention to that, and then have procedures in place or processes to know what you're going to do when the alert logging has stopped. And then, of course, reviewing analysis and reporting of those logs. There's a lot of data coming in via those logs, so You really need some sort of process in place to get rid of the static so you can focus on the things that are really an incident and take action on them. So these are the big top 10, what we see regularly. If you go to the next slide. You'll see how these are, being findings across the scope of what we've assessed. 50% of which being FIPS and 35% being MFA, but there's still a good chunk associated with all of the rest, and that's across everybody we've assessed. Next slide, please.
We have done a few studies on the SPRS data, both the data that is entered by the DIBCAC as a result of the medium or high assessments, but also more importantly on the basic self-assessment data that is entered by the contractors, right? All based on the same standard with the same requirements. And so if you'll see in this chart, the original entry, what we have done, a study over time has shown that the average original entry was 66, a score of 66, say points, but 66 being the score. And there are improvements over time. So the updated entry for those that have updated or closed out POAM items, the average score is now 69%. So while that is only a 3% increase, it is an increase. So we have seen that there are lots of entries that are not being updated, POAMs not being closed for the basic assessments especially. However, when we do our assessments and DIBCAC goes in, they have an extra mechanism, right? So they have us coming in and discussing what happens and the POAMs and what needs to be closed and the date and whatnot. So there's that extra layer of accountability there, why it's medium and high confidence, right? But with that self-assessment there, many times they'll perhaps just forget to go in and update those scores, but they are closed. So we would like to see obviously that increase over time to be a bigger delta, but it is a move in the positive, in the right direction, which is always what we're looking for cyber compliance. Next slide, please. Let's see. Oh, here's some references that we have included here, of course, to the 7012 and some of the cyber FAQs. We rely a lot on that, and we will turn lots of people over to look at the FAQs. I know that is the same with not just our DoD assessment methodology clauses, provisions in clause 70, 19, 70, 20, 70, 12, but also CMMC as well. So that is a handy, I save that actually in my browser as my favorite because I go to it a lot for myself. So also the 170, obviously the 171, which is the standard that has to be implemented according to the 7012. And then the 171A, that tells you how to do it, right? So how do you perform the assessments? That's exactly what the DIBCAC assessors do. They follow this along with the DoD assessment methodology. So it's there. The answers are there. You just have to be able to connect the dots and go follow it line by line. And supplier performance risk system, that is the government repository for being able to enter these scores in, right? And also contracting officers are required to go in and check and make sure that a current, that means within 3 years of when they're looking, a current score is entered into SPRS for that particular cage code, that particular covered contractor information system that is actually performing on the contract. They have to make sure that that is in there in order to make award. So if it is not entered in there, at least even a basic is entered in there, then that means that they technically could not be made award to. So that could penalize the organization. And then the DoD assessment methodology is obviously outlines what the different levels of assessments are, and it can be found there. In addition, so this is our beautiful new forward-facing DIBCAC website. So everyone can see this. It's forward-facing. Everyone can go there and look at these publicly available resources to be able to use. And I think what we are encouraging the most in using this is what you see. It's kind of small, I think, maybe. It's under, in the middle, it says publicly releasable resources. This is the actual, structured after the actual database, the DIBCAC assessment database that we use. And this is a publicly releasable version. So we have this here to encourage and to help contractors that are doing their basic self-assessments to be able to use exactly what we use when we're doing our high assessments, for example. And hopefully this will be able to help you. It will walk you straight through every single one of those requirements, just like the 171A does. So please, please, please use these resources that we have made publicly available. In addition, under the additional resources, there's many other resources that are available to you that we link to you. There's also a video that we created, and it will be obsolete, obviously, when CMMC comes around or there's any updates to the 7019 or 7020. But currently, it will describe the process as it exists now with the DoD assessment methodology. It will describe the different levels of assessments that are available, basic, medium, high, all of that. It's about 6 or 7 minutes long. So I highly recommend that you go and take a peek at that video. It'll answer a lot of questions. Next slide. Questions. This is the fun part.
Okay. So I think this has been a very, very comprehensive presentation. And so the questions that I have are, again, few and far between, and come from the perspective, if I may, of a small to medium, contractor. So it goes something along the lines, I'm a small contractor. Listen, I understand I got to comply with it, but really I'm not going to get audited by, DIBCAC. And if suppose I get a tap on the shoulder and Jennifer calls me up for an assessment, maybe I'll have some time to go and put my SSP together and get ready for an assessment. So we'd like to hear from you, what, happens if I'm tapped and I don't have an SSP ready, I don't have a SPURS score ready, and how would you react to, well, it's not going to happen to me,
Well, if they're trying to compete for a contract that has the 7012 clause and the 7019 provision, the 7019 is a provision, not a clause. So a provision will go into solicitations. It invokes the pre-award, any pre-award requirement, right, in order to be considered for award. Well, like I said previously, they might not be considered during the source selection process if the 7019 is present, and the 7019 requires that contractors have to have at least a basic assessment score entered into SPURS, right? And so one of the requirements, according to do the assessment, is to have an SSP. So if they don't have that, they're already not compliant. And then they don't have the score in the SPURS. So I would move quick in order to get compliant and in order to be considered for source selection. So contracting officers are told in DFARS 204.7303, I believe, the procedures section, that they have to make sure that a current score, and we know what that current score is, that's within 3 years, is actually present in order to consider those guys for award, right? They verify that it's actually in there. Now, the other thing is they could be considered non-compliant if they do have contracts that have DFARS clauses, those DFARS clauses in it. 7012, for example, it's been around for a long time. For the 7020, because 7020 is going to be the clause that actually appears in the contract, but the 7019 is the provision that would appear in the solicitation, right? So standard contract remedies could absolutely apply if an existing contract is there and they are not compliant with any of these. So in some cases, companies have been issued corrective action reports, CARs, as a result of our DIBCAC assessments. And they could even be reported to the DCMA Contract Integrity Center to investigate possible fraud. So it's serious. You want to make sure that you are compliant, that you have that SSP, that you have those scores into SPURS if you want to be considered for award or to maintain your awards.
Well, thank you. Again, super clear. And my very last question, in order to keep this thing going on time, you mentioned medium and high audits. For many of our, audience that are not familiar with the jargon, could you describe to us what's a medium and a high audit?
So for a medium assessment, the DIBCAC will request that the DIB send us their SSP. And once we receive their SSP, we will review it and score it accordingly, just based off the SSP. So it's really important that an SSP exists and that it is an accurate representation of your environment. Should we reach out to you and you don't have an SSP to provide us, I'm going to refer back to Jennifer's answer about possibly referring them to, of course, the DIBCAC CSE. A high assessment, it's a little more in depth. We're going to reach out probably about 6 months in advance. We're going to start engaging with the company to set up an assessment date. In preparation for that, we are going to ask for the SSP, some CAGE information, and a few other documents to start reviewing in preparation for that assessment. But the high assessment is going to be on-site or virtual on-site combination where we're going to be looking for demonstrations of the implementation of these requirements. It's going to be an over-shoulder assessment where we're watching you check the settings, show us how you're doing things. So it's very much verifying that everything is in place as you have documented in your SSP. And that'll take about a week of us during the actual assessment phase of the process.
Well, thank you so very much, Jennifer, Stacy, and William, for your time and for your guidance. We'll mention to the audience that, actual examples of these audits conducted jointly by DIBCAC and C3PAOs under the voluntary CMMC assessment programs will be covered by the C3PAOs that did it later on in today's sessions. So please stay tuned. The next will be, again, an overview of your current requirements by one of the top federal contracts lawyers. That'll start at about 1 p.m. Orly will kindly provide that information. And again, big thank you, Stacy, Jennifer, and William, for participating and for your very, very clear and concise remarks.
You're welcome. Thank you for having us.
Have a good day.